glorification or promotion of terrorism. And what we want to see as conditions are conditions that will actually allow the police to have this march take place, but in a way where they can actually enforce the law at it. So we want the size of it to be limited, we want the duration of it to be limited, and we want its route to be limited in order to reduce the kind of disruption and intimidation to the community that has been happening, and to ensure that the police can actually enforce the law at this march.
The police say there's been an increase in anti-Semitic offences. Lisa, who attended the protest, said she's worried, but the community has pulled together.
This type of signage that you saw, the type of chants that you heard, it just makes you feel like you're stepping back in time. And we want to feel, you know, we're a small community and we just want to feel protected. And it's just really, it's just so disheartening that, you know, we don't feel like we're getting protected in the right way. I've got family in Israel and friends in Israel as well. So yeah, I bet every Jewish person is affected by this. You don't have to have family there because there aren't that many of us and we have a really strong, scary history. So anything like this brings us together.
This Saturday, there'll be another national march for Palestine. The Met Police said details of how they will police the protest will be released on Friday. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign didn't respond in time for comment. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
Malcolm Hudson brings us more.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said new government assessments on artificial intelligence give a stark warning. The papers suggest AI offers opportunities for growth and advances, but also a new range of dangers. Sunak said he wants to be honest with the public about the risks of AI as he gave a speech on the emerging technologies.
AI could make it easier to build chemical or biological weapons. Terrorist groups could use AI to spread fear and destruction on an even greater scale. Criminals could exploit AI for cyber attacks, disinformation, fraud, or even child sexual abuse. And in the most unlikely but extreme cases, there is even the risk that humanity could lose control of AI completely, through the kind of AI sometimes referred to as superintelligence.
He said mitigating the risk of extinction because of artificial intelligence should be a global priority, alongside pandemics and nuclear war. Next week, the government will host an AI safety summit at Bletchley Park, where Britain's World War II codebreakers worked. The summit will bring together world leaders, tech firms, and civil society to discuss the emerging technology. Sunak announced the UK will establish the world's first AI Safety Institute.
It will advance the world's knowledge of AI safety, and it will carefully examine, evaluate, and test new types of AI so that we understand what each new model is capable of, exploring all the risks, from social harms like bias and misinformation, through to the most extreme risks of all.
He said tech firms have already trusted the UK with privileged access to their models, and says this makes Britain well placed to create the AI Safety Institute. But he added that the UK won't rush to regulate AI. Firstly, because he wants to encourage innovation, and secondly, because he says it's hard to regulate what you don't understand.
When you're dealing with something that is so fast-moving and indeed not fully understood, even by the people who are developing the technology themselves, I think it's hard to stand there and say, well, this is precisely the best way to regulate it.
Sunak said the UK is investing heavily into AI. He said any regulation should be based on empirical evidence. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden has confirmed China has accepted an invitation to the UK's AI Safety Summit next week, but the decision to invite China has caused controversy in some quarters. The Prime Minister said engaging with China may not be successful, but should be attempted because it's the world's second AI power behind the US. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss, meanwhile, said she's deeply disturbed by the invitation. She said Beijing has a fundamentally different attitude to the West, seeing AI as a means for state control, and urged the Prime Minister to reconsider. After a turbulent 3 weeks searching for a Speaker, the US House of Representatives finally decided on a leader. House Republicans voted unanimously to elect Mike Johnson on the first ballot yesterday. This clears the way for the lower chamber to resume its basic duties and respond to the crisis in the Middle East.
House Speaker Mike Johnson has been a man of many hats. Vice chair of the House Republican Conference, he's been chair of the Republican Study Committee and held the assistant leadership role of GOP Deputy Whip. He sat on the Judiciary Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Select Committee on Weaponization of the Federal Government. The Louisiana Republican was first elected to the House in 2016. The 51-year-old attorney with a focus on constitutional law now has a series of near-immediate decisions to make, and the challenge of uniting fractures within the GOP majority. Johnson's first move as Speaker was bringing a non-binding resolution to the floor, reaffirming support of Israel's right to self-defense. It passed with strong bipartisan approval, with over 400 lawmakers backing the measure.
Let the enemies of freedom around the world hear us loud and clear. The People's House is back in business.
The newly elected Speaker's agenda focuses heavily on completing the appropriations process before the government funding deadline next month. Johnson has opposed further aid to Ukraine, voting against the close to $40 billion aid package in May. He supported bills to tighten border security, prohibit mask mandates on planes, and stop gender-related surgery and hormone procedures on teens. Johnson has been a vocal supporter of former President Trump and was among the nearly 140 Republicans that disputed 2020 Electoral College results. He is the author of an unsuccessful appeal from House Republicans to the Supreme Court to have the integrity of the election looked at. That was over changes to voting procedures in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan during the pandemic he argued were unconstitutional. Trump reacted to Johnson's victory.
You will be a great Speaker of the House, and we were very happy to help. I've known him for a long time. He's a tremendous leader, a tremendous man, comes from a wonderful place, Louisiana. He's going to make us all proud.
Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Hostages from 35 different nationalities. We demand not only the U.S., but all of the international community put at its highest agenda, number one agenda, bringing the hostages back home now.
Hamas's military unit says the Israeli bombardment so far has killed 50 of the hostages the militants abducted during their October 7th assault. As for Americans, at least 10 are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. Meanwhile, the U.S. military launched airstrikes on 2 locations in eastern Syria linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The move comes in retaliation after at least 12 attacks on U.S. bases and personnel in Iraq and 4 in Syria since the 17th. 21 Americans were injured in 2 of those assaults. Information about the specific targets and other details have not been provided. President Joe Biden is said to have directed the narrowly tailored strikes to make clear that the U.S. will not tolerate such attacks and will defend itself, its personnel, and its interests. The Pentagon maintains the operation is separate from Israel's war against Hamas, adding the U.S. does not seek a broader conflict. Continuing
Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated terrorist groups.
President Biden ordered the airstrikes. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stated Iranian-backed attacks against U.S. forces are unacceptable and must stop.
A defense official says 2 F-16 fighter jets using precision munitions carried out the attack and that weapons and ammunition facilities were taken out.
A statement from the Pentagon said precision self-defense strikes are a response to recent attacks that spiked on October 17th. The U.S. is bolstering its presence in the Middle East as attacks on U.S. and coalition forces rise. The Pentagon says it's deploying roughly 900 American troops to protect U.S. forces and interests overseas.
The news coincides with the shipment of a terminal high-altitude area defense system and more Patriot missile batteries to the region.
The Pentagon says U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria were attacked 3 times yesterday. That brings the total within the last week up to 16 and 19 since the war in Israel began. 21 U.S. personnel reportedly sustained minor injuries.
Iran's foreign minister warned the UN yesterday if Israel does not stop its offensive, the U.S. will, in his words, not be spared from this fire.
And White House spokesperson John Kirby defended the U.S. stance on death tolls coming out of Gaza.
Kirby was asked why the State Department changed its approach when reporting numbers from the Gaza and Palestinian Ministry of Health. Watch.
We all obviously grieve with the families and loved ones who are affected by that, but the numbers are not reliable. They're just not reliable. And I don't need to tell you how to do your jobs, but if you're going to report casualty figures out of Gaza, I would frankly recommend you don't choose numbers put out by an organization that's run by a terrorist organization. What's harsh is the way Hamas is using people as human shields. What's harsh is taking a couple of hundred hostages and leaving families anxious, waiting and worrying to figure out where their loved ones are. So what's harsh is dropping in on a music festival and slaughtering a bunch of young people just trying to enjoy an afternoon. I could go on and on. That's what's harsh.
On that topic, 50 Christian and Jewish leaders have signed a letter that says Israel must do all that is needed to destroy Hamas. So we're bringing in Dr. Susan Michael, who organized and signed the letter, to hear more about her moral reasoning on that. She's also the USA Director of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. It's really good to see you. Now, first, I would like to hear what prompted you to organize this.
Mass weapons like you wouldn't believe. They've already launched close to 10,000 missiles towards Israel and Israel civilians since October the 7th. So they are armed, and they are a very, very dangerous terrorist organization. They must be eliminated, just like America had to go into Europe and eliminate the Nazis. Just like we went after Al-Qaeda and bin Laden after 9/11, Israel must get rid of this terrorist organization that has done nothing but terrorize Israelis since 2007. Just today, there was a barrage of missiles all across the middle of Israel, not the south, Tel Aviv and central Israel. People are in their bomb shelters right now because of this terrorist organization. They will not stop. They will only use a ceasefire to rearm. Israel must eliminate them.
Thank you so much, Susan Michael, for sharing your stance on this. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Right, and let's keep in mind that Israelis were giving the Palestinians the forewarning and saying to evacuate that part of Gaza before the bombings, whereas the terrorists did not give any warning to those people at the Supernova Festival before they massacred them.
Right. That's very interesting. And somebody had floated the example of to think about how, let's say, what if Israel was doing the same thing, basically using women, children as human shields? How would the Hamas's reaction be to that? How would that be handled? And I think it's pretty clear. So it's just, the nature of a terrorist organization ruling that area.
Right. Yeah. And another example of that is that Israel uses missiles to deflect the rockets coming in to destroy civilians, whereas Hamas, they use missiles directly to kill civilians. And sometimes it's their own people.
That's also, yeah.
So stick around. Federal prosecutors withdraw another subpoena in an inquiry into former President Trump's fundraising after the 2020 election.
President Biden has new competition in his bid for re-election. Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips is throwing his hat into the ring.
What's
Gaza? European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the announcement yesterday. This is on top of their existing pledge.
You might recall the humanitarian aid for Gaza was planned 25 million, and a week ago approximately we tripled it to 75 million euros. Now these additional 50 million have to be implemented.
Von der Leyen said it's very important for the EU to continue efforts to deal with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
The president of the European Union Council, Charles Michel, echoed her comments. Michel said the EU is in contact with regional leaders to encourage humanitarian solutions and the release of hostages.
The United States on Friday expanded its effort to cut off funding for Hamas.
The Treasury Department announced a second round of sanctions against people and organizations linked to the terrorist group.
The new measures highlight Iran's role in providing financial, logistical, and operational support to Hamas. Sanctions include a Hamas representative in Iran and members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard.
The Deputy Treasury Secretary traveled to London to shore up support from the UK. The sanctions freeze any US-based assets owned or controlled by the named individuals and organizations.
They also prohibit financial transactions with the sanctioned individuals or organizations. How are Israeli communities
may be necessary to assist with? Now, their specific mission remains to be seen, but there are many uses for American soldiers right now in the Middle East.
And given your military experience, what strategies do you think should be employed to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from escalating?
Well, I think it's difficult right now to be able to say that it can be de-escalated in some respects with using American forces or even a threat of their use, but the deterrent effect is worth it. I think that's so far a working strategy. But the other thing I would be concerned about, frankly, is American forces in places like Iraq or Syria, where their strategy and their purpose there are largely undefined. And so we're leaving American soldiers out there basically in the desert in the Middle East that are exposed to attacks from multiple enemies who probably they shouldn't be there. That's one of the things I would consider doing, is just not having American forces there in the first place.
And air defense systems and elements are being deployed to deter further violence against Israel in the region. And what do you think is the significance of that in terms of the broader military strategy of the U.S. here?
Well, I think that's significant in the fact that it's a deterrent effect. It's defense, and it's not defined as offense. So we're doing our best to make sure that we're going in there to be a protector, and that's about it. Because right now we're not prepared to say that we need to be on the offense against, well, frankly, anybody. And Congress has not authorized anything like that in the first place, and that's Congress's job, not the president's. He can't make that decision, so that's critical to know as well. But those air defense systems are on the way, and they're actually spread in numerous countries.
And how do you think the U.S. military could better protect U.S. troops over there?
Well, first of all, a lot of them are, people like the Navy, of course, in the Mediterranean and in other locations in the seas around the area, and to keep them there is one good way to protect them. The other way to protect them is to make sure that they're not in the places where they don't need to be. And I would actually consider removing them from some of those countries, especially like Syria, where we're there as more like occupiers than anything else. They've never invited us to be there, so we really shouldn't be there. Their strategy's not defined. So why risk them in a mission that's not defined or understood or even really constitutionally authorized? So in some cases, let's just take them out of harm's way.
And how do you see the fluctuations in the number of troops who are ready to be deployed to the Middle East at this point affecting the overall military strategy and the situation on the ground?
Well, first of all, I think we're assuming that there is really a sound strategy in place in the first place at all. And I'm not sure that that's there. I'm not sure it's been shared to the American people who own the decision of whether or not this happens in the first place. So that's one of my concerns. And what they're doing with them specifically, I'm always concerned about the increasing numbers of American military forces in the region that actually makes it easier to target them or increases the chances of an accident that could cause us to get drawn into a larger war, or we could be the cause of a larger conflict. That's something we should be concerned about.
And given your expertise in military affairs, how do you think international coalitions and partnerships could play a role in stabilizing things in the Middle East?
Well, partnerships are always key to how we do business, and that's whether it be NATO or other areas around the world. Because if we have a common vision of democratic nations and how we operate, we can all come together and improve things. I think the Middle East is one of the greatest challenges towards that, because who do they hate almost as much as Israel is generally Western democracies, and specifically the U.S. So we have to weigh the fact that our presence there might actually make it worse than better. But it doesn't always have to be military either. I think there are definitely economic things that we can be doing. In fact, we should be doing first, just like we used to do with Iran before Biden took office.
All right, Colonel Darren Gaub, great to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Coming up, Texas police may soon be able to arrest illegal...
I love you.
After 15 years of smoking, Eva Marie quit. There's a new lung cancer screening that could save her life. You've stopped smoking. Now start screening. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Chief Division Counsel and DOJ have approved a no-knock breach. We want the subject to be on display, doing the walk of shame, full visual impact. Any questions?
Are we becoming a police state? We don't need to have a crime. What we need is a person to look at. And then we go find out what crime you did.
Our focus is shifting. Our main priority as a bureau is going to be domestic terrorism.
It really paints anybody who's right of center. If you're a pro-life, pro-family Catholic, they define you as radical.
These are anti-government, we have freedom of religion and freedom of speech, violent extremists, and they must be dealt with.
Professionals are being turned away due to a staffing shortage. We speak to a former nurse and representative about this and what's causing nurse dissatisfaction.
And when we think of cozy Airbnbs, airplanes don't usually come to mind, but a man from England thinks differently. We take a look at the extraordinary transformation after the break.
The highest art is beautiful, breathtaking.
In Maine, also delivering a message to Congress, saying, I urge Republican lawmakers in Congress to fulfill their duty to protect the American people, work with us to pass a bill banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, to enact universal background checks, to require safe storage of guns, and end immunity for liability for gun manufacturers. On Capitol Hill, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer echoing President Biden and saying, quote,
Naturally.
we must do everything we can to stop the epidemic of gun violence in our country. We asked Florida Republican Congresswoman Kat Cammack about the shooting.
Absolutely horrific. My heart breaks for all the victims, their families, the community.
And what Congress should do to prevent mass shootings.
Rather than be in a rush to politicize it, I think we should focus on the immediate, urgent need, which is responding to the crisis.
I asked Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley for his response to President Biden's call to action, saying the focus should be on tougher penalties for people who break the gun laws that are already in place.
I don't want law-abiding citizens punished for criminals, but do I think we need to increase the penalties for those who commit crimes or try to commit crimes? Absolutely, I do. And do I think that people who have been civilly committed, like apparently this suspect was, should be able to get firearms right when they get out? No, I don't.
Flags over the Capitol
He had a
flying
weapon.
at half-staff in memory of those killed and injured in Maine. In Washington, I'm David Aid for Newsnet.
He wasn't born to be a killer. And he's got I'm sure, a father and a mother that would have never believed this would have happened with him. So all I can say is I'm sorry that it's happened to all of us, and I'm sorry what may happen to him. And God will prevail. Hate will never bring my son back.
Leroy Walker Sr. added that his faith would help him cope with his tragic loss. Israel reportedly killing a Hamas commander in Gaza. This as Israel continues raids into the Gaza Strip.
The raids are believed to be preparations for an expected ground invasion.
During the last day, infantry forces, combat engineering, and armed forces accompanied the fighter jets, carried out a targeted raid in the center of the Gaza Strip as part of the preparations for the next stages of the war.
The Israeli military says it killed the commander of a Western Hamas battalion. They also struck over 250 Hamas targets, including a terrorist tunnel network in Gaza that detonated a secondary explosion.
Israel also updated the number of hostages it suspects were kidnapped by Hamas. The new number is now at 229. The military says it notified the families.
And Israel today said an aerial threat was spotted in the Red Sea region. They linked this to a projectile that landed on Egyptian coastal territory.
In recent hours, an aerial threat was spotted in the Red Sea region. Combat helicopters were scrambled in response to the threat, and this matter is now being investigated. To our understanding, the strike that took place in Egypt originated in this threat. Israel will work with Egypt and the United States and bolster regional defenses against threats from the Red Sea region.
Egypt's army spokesperson said that an unidentified drone crashed on Friday morning in a town in the Red Sea region. The incident reportedly injured 6 people.
U.S. military carried out airstrikes in Syria near the border of Iraq today.
The Pentagon says the targets were being used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated terrorist groups.
President Biden ordered the airstrikes. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stated, Iranian-backed attacks against U.S. forces are unacceptable and must stop.
A defense official says 2 F-16 fighter jets using precision munitions carried out the attack and that weapons and ammunition facilities were taken out.
A statement from the Pentagon said precision self-defense strikes are a response to recent attacks that spiked on October 17th. The U.S. is bolstering its presence in the Middle East as attacks on U.S. and coalition forces rise. The Pentagon says it's deploying roughly 900 American troops to protect U.S. forces and interests overseas.
The news coincides with the shipment of a THAAD missile defense system and more Patriot missile batteries in the region.
The Pentagon says U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria were attacked 3 times yesterday. That brings the total attacks in the last week to 16 and 19 since the war began in Israel. 21 U.S. personnel reportedly sustained minor injuries.
Iran's foreign minister warned the UN yesterday if Israel does not stop its offensive, the U.S. will, in his words, not be spared from this fire.
Trucks carrying food, medicine, and water are set to cross into the Gaza Strip today.
There's still no agreement to get fuel in Gaza. Israel is concerned that Hamas will intercept the deliveries.
We have seen some deliveries of trucks starting. They started on the 21st of October. We have gotten in approximately 74 trucks. We're expecting another 8 or so today.
The UN Palestinian Refugee Agency said the impasse is jeopardizing life-saving humanitarian operations there. Officials are also grappling with the issue of deciding how to distribute aid.
Gazans lined up on Friday outside a UN water station, eager to fill up bottles with fresh water. Supplies of food, water, medicines, and fuel are critically low for Gaza's 2.3 million people.
But Israel and others have raised concerns about whether that aid would actually make it to civilians.
The European Union